I'm Carolyn, 28 female. I live with my fiancé, Thomas, in a modest but cozy apartment in the city, where I work as an architectural drafter, spending my days translating ideas into precise, tangible plans. My life has always been about structure, about building things that are meant to last. I thought my family was built on that same solid foundation, but I was about to find out it was a facade, hiding rot that went deeper than I could have ever imagined. This is the story of how a single piece of jewelry, a family heirloom promised to me, exposed a lifetime of lies, and forced me to draft a new plan for my future, one that didn't include the people I once trusted most. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The promise of the ring was woven into the fabric of my childhood. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol, a story passed down through the women in my family. My grandmother, Clara, the woman I was almost named after, was the keeper of this story. The ring itself was an exquisite Art Deco piece from the 1920s, a delicate platinum band with a stunning sapphire the color of a twilight sky, surrounded by a halo of tiny, sparkling diamonds. It was elegant, timeless, and held more sentimental value than any monetary worth could ever capture. My great-grandfather had it custom-made for my great-grandmother, and it had been passed to the firstborn daughter of each generation since. Grandma Clara would let me try it on during special visits. I remember the cool weight of it on my small finger, how the sapphire seemed to hold a secret universe within its depths. "One day, Carolyn," she would say, her voice warm and soft like a well-loved blanket, "this will be yours. It belongs to the firstborn granddaughter. It's a symbol of our strength, our resilience." She would tell me stories of my great-grandmother wearing it through hardship and joy, a constant reminder of enduring love. The ring wasn't just an inheritance, it was my birthright, a tangible link to the strong women I came from. My mother, Margaret, was an only child, so the ring passed directly to her, and I, as her firstborn and only daughter, was the next in line. My mother always reinforced this promise. "When you get engaged, darling," she'd say with a smile that I now recognize was more about performance than affection, "we'll have the ring resized for you. It will be my greatest joy to see you wear it." It was a settled fact, a cornerstone of our family lore. My younger brother, David, never showed any interest in it. To him, it was just Mom's old ring. The promise was so ingrained in me that I never thought to question it. It was as certain as the sun rising in the east. When my fiancé, Thomas, proposed, he did so with a simple, beautiful solitaire diamond. He knew the story of my grandmother's ring and understood that it would be my true engagement ring, the one I would wear every day for the rest of my life. We even planned our engagement party with the ring's presentation in mind. It was meant to be the centerpiece of the evening, a beautiful ceremony where my mother would formally pass the heirloom to me in front of all our loved ones. It was supposed to be a perfect night, a celebration of love, future, and family tradition. The party was held in the manicured backyard of my parents' suburban home. White tents were adorned with fairy lights, casting a magical glow over the laughing guests. My mother, Margaret, was in her element. As a prominent member of several charity boards, she was an expert at organizing events and playing the role of the gracious, perfect hostess. She glided through the crowd, her smile perfectly in place, accepting compliments on the decor, the catering, and her impeccable taste. My father, a quiet man who always seemed to exist in Margaret's shadow, trailed behind her, offering polite nods. My brother, David, was there with his new fiancée, Jessica. They had only been dating for 6 months, a whirlwind romance that my mother had enthusiastically endorsed from day one. David, with his fledgling tech startup, was my mother's golden child. She saw him as a visionary, an entrepreneur destined for greatness, and Jessica, a brand ambassador for luxury goods, was the perfect accessory for the life my mother envisioned for him. She was beautiful, polished, and carried herself with an air of practiced elegance that my mother deeply admired. I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name as I watched my mother fawn over Jessica, touching her arm and laughing at something she said. My relationship with my mother had always been more structured. I was the responsible one, the quiet achiever. I got good grades, chose a sensible career, and never caused any trouble. David was the charismatic risk-taker, and his gambles always seemed to earn more of our mother's praise than my steady successes. Still, I pushed the feeling aside. Tonight was my night. Thomas was by my side, his hand warm and steady in mine. My Aunt Isabel, my mother's older sister and my favorite relative, gave me a reassuring wink from across the lawn. She was the family's unofficial historian, an antiques dealer who appreciated the story behind an object more than anyone. She loved the ring and the tradition it represented, and she was just as excited as I was for the presentation. As my mother clinked a glass to get everyone's attention, my heart fluttered with anticipation. The moment I had dreamed of since I was a little girl was finally here. The fairy lights twinkled, a soft breeze rustled the leaves, and for a fleeting second, everything felt perfect. My mother stood on the small, makeshift stage near the patio, a microphone in her hand, beaming at the assembled guests. The soft glow of the party lights illuminated her face, making her look like the benevolent matriarch she so desperately wanted everyone to see her as. Thomas squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with pride and love for me. We stood near the front, a perfect vantage point for what I thought would be the happiest moment of my life, second only to the proposal itself. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us tonight," my mother began, her voice smooth and practiced. "It fills my heart with such joy to see my daughter, Carolyn, so happy with a wonderful man like Thomas." She paused for a light smattering of applause, and I felt a warm blush creep up my neck. I caught Aunt Isabel's eye, and she gave me another encouraging smile. This was it. "Family is everything," Margaret continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing, strangely not on me, but on my brother David and his fiancée, Jessica. "It's about legacy, about building for the future, and about ensuring the next generation is strong and secure." I felt a flicker of confusion. This was an odd preamble for giving me the ring. I expected a story about Grandma Clara, about the line of women in our family. Instead, she was talking about building for the future. "As many of you know," she went on, her voice taking on a more dramatic tone, "our family has an heirloom, a ring that symbolizes the enduring strength and promise of our lineage." She reached into the pocket of her silk jacket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. It was the familiar navy blue box I'd seen 100 times in her jewelry drawer. Inside was my future. "This ring," she said, opening the box to reveal the sapphire and diamonds glittering under the lights, "is meant to be a foundation for the future of this family." I took a half step forward, my own smile now feeling tight and uncertain. Why was she dragging this out? Why wasn't she looking at me? Thomas's grip on my hand tightened, a silent question in his touch. "And that is why," my mother declared, her voice ringing with a false sense of magnanimity, "I have decided to pass it on to the woman who will be joining our family and helping my son build a new and powerful legacy." She turned, her back almost completely to me, and gestured for Jessica to come forward. My mind went blank. The sounds of the party, the soft music, the murmur of conversations, faded into a dull roar. It was as if I was underwater, watching a scene unfold through a distorted lens. Jessica, looking genuinely surprised but pleased, stepped forward. David, standing beside her, had a smug, self-satisfied smirk on his face that I wanted to slap away. He knew this was planned. Jessica glided onto the stage, her smile bright and triumphant. "Jessica, my dear," my mother said, taking the ring from its box, "welcome to the family." She took Jessica's left hand and slid my grandmother's ring, my ring, onto her finger. The sapphire glowed on Jessica's perfectly manicured hand. It was a perfect fit. A wave of nausea washed over me. This couldn't be happening. It was a mistake, a terrible, cruel joke. I looked around, desperate for someone to share my disbelief. My father was staring at his shoes, his posture slumped in defeat. Aunt Isabel's face was a mask of thunderous shock and fury. The guests were murmuring, a confused and awkward tension descending upon the party. They had all heard the stories. They all knew the ring was meant for me. My mother, completely oblivious or, more likely, completely indifferent to the shockwaves she had sent through her own party, raised her champagne glass. "A toast," she announced. "To David and Jessica, to their future, their success, and to a new family tradition." A few people, mostly David's friends, raised their glasses. Most stood frozen, their eyes darting between me, my mother, and the ring now sparkling on the wrong hand. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and heavy, suffocating me. Thomas turned to me, his face pale with shock and anger. "Carolyn," he whispered. But I couldn't respond. The only thing I could see was that ring. The promise whispered by my grandmother, the symbol of my heritage, the one thing I had held on to as a sacred family bond, was now adorning the hand of a woman who had been in our lives for less than a year. It wasn't a gift. It was a theft, orchestrated by my own mother. The tears that had been welling in my eyes finally spilled over, hot and bitter. I felt a sob tear through my chest, a raw, wounded sound that cut through the awkward silence. I pulled my hand from Thomas's and turned, blindly pushing my way through the stunned crowd. I could hear my mother's voice, laced with irritation, call after me, "Carolyn, don't be so dramatic." That was the final blow. It wasn't enough to humiliate me. She had to dismiss my pain as theatrics. I didn't stop. I ran through the house, out the front door, and down the street, the sound of the party fading behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from the woman who had just shattered my heart in front of everyone I knew. I had fled my own engagement party, a refugee from my own family, leaving a thief wearing my birthright. The hours that followed were a blur of tears and disbelief. Thomas found me a few blocks away, sitting on a park bench under a streetlight, shivering despite the mild evening air. He wrapped his jacket around me and just held me, letting me cry until I had no tears left. He didn't offer empty platitudes or rage against my mother, not yet. He just provided a solid, unwavering presence, a safe harbor in the storm that had just capsized my world. He drove us back to our apartment, the silence in the car thick with unspoken words. My phone was buzzing incessantly with calls and texts from my mother, my father, and even David. I ignored them all. Each buzz felt like another small betrayal, another demand for me to swallow my pain and pretend everything was fine for the sake of appearances. We got inside and I collapsed onto the sofa, feeling utterly hollowed out. Thomas made me a cup of tea, his movements quiet and gentle. "What just happened?" I whispered, the words barely audible. "She just gave it away, like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing." Thomas sat beside me, his expression hardened with a protective anger he was clearly trying to contain for my sake. "What she did was cruel, Carolyn," he said, his voice low and firm. "Unforgivably cruel. This isn't about the ring, it's about respect, it's about love, and she showed you none tonight." He was right. The physical object was beautiful, but it was the promise behind it that mattered. My mother hadn't just given away a piece of jewelry. She had publicly declared that my feelings, our family's history, and her own promises were worthless to her. They were disposable currency, easily spent to purchase favor and status for her favored child. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a number I knew belonged to my Aunt Isabel. I almost ignored it, too emotionally exhausted to talk to anyone, but her name brought a small flicker of comfort. She had looked as horrified as I felt. I opened the message. It didn't contain any words, just a video file attachment. Confused, I pressed play. The video was shaky at first, clearly filmed on an old phone. It showed my grandmother, Clara, sitting in her favorite armchair in her sunlit living room. She looked older than I remembered her in my mind's eye, frailer, but her eyes were as bright and sharp as ever. This must have been taken shortly before she passed away a few years ago. Aunt Isabel's voice came from behind the camera. "Just say it again, Mom," she said gently, "so we have it, for safekeeping." Grandma Clara smiled, a soft, warm expression that made my heart ache. She held up her left hand, displaying the sapphire ring. "This ring," she said, her voice clear and steady, every word resonating with love and conviction, "is my mother's and her mother's before her. It goes to the firstborn daughter. When I'm gone, it goes to my daughter, Margaret." She paused, then looked directly into the camera, as if she were looking right at me. "And after Margaret, it is to go to her firstborn daughter, my firstborn granddaughter, Carolyn. It is for her, Only for her, that is my wish, that is the tradition. She then said something that made the air leave my lungs. I'm putting this on record, Isabel, because I worry. Margaret has ambitions. She sometimes sees people as tools to get what she wants, even her own children. I want to make sure Carolyn is protected. This ring is her legacy, not a bargaining chip. The video ended. I stared at my phone screen, my hands trembling. I played it again, and again. Each time, my grandmother's words were a balm to my raw, wounded heart, but they also ignited a cold, hard flame of anger in my gut. This wasn't just a broken promise from my mother. It was a direct, calculated defiance of my grandmother's. Final wish. My mother knew. She had to have known. My grandmother had essentially predicted her own daughter's treachery. The part about my mother seeing people as tools, it was a devastatingly accurate assessment I had never allowed myself to fully confront. I had spent my life trying to earn her love, believing her approval was conditional on my achievements. Now I saw it wasn't conditional at all, it was transactional. And I had just been on the losing end of a transaction designed to elevate my brother. A new text from Aunt Isabel came through. She knew about this video. I told her I had it a year ago. I never thought I'd have to use it. My blood ran cold. My mother knew this evidence existed and she did it anyway. That wasn't just callousness, it was a declaration of war. She was so confident in her power over the family, so certain of her ability to control the narrative, that she believed a dead woman's wish and a video recording were irrelevant. She believed I would simply cry, accept the humiliation, and move on because that's what I had always done. I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over to avoid conflict. But hearing my grandmother's voice, hearing her try to protect me from beyond the grave, changed something inside me. The part of me that wanted to hide and cry was being replaced by something else, something steely and resolute. My mother hadn't just taken a ring. She had stolen my grandmother's legacy and disrespected her memory, and I was not going to let her get away with it. Thomas watched me, his expression shifting from concern to something like awe as he saw the change in my face. "Carolyn?" he asked. I looked up from the phone, my eyes dry now. "She's not going to win," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "She thinks this is over, but it's just the beginning." The day after the party, the floodgates of my mother's narrative control opened wide. My phone was bombarded with texts, not just from her, but from extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins who had been at the party. The messages were a masterclass in gaslighting and manipulation, all clearly orchestrated by Margaret. They ranged from feigned concern to outright accusation. "Carolyn, your mother is so worried. You caused such a scene. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. You know how your mother wants what's best for the whole family. Don't be selfish, dear. Jessica is family now, too. You should be happy for your brother." The most cutting one came from my mother's cousin, who wrote, "Your mother explained that your grandmother's wishes were actually for the ring to go where it would provide the most familial stability. With David's new company, it's an important symbol. You need to be more understanding." Familial stability. A symbol for David's company. Each excuse was more ludicrous than the last, a desperate attempt to paint her betrayal as a noble sacrifice for the greater good of the family. She was reframing my pain as childish selfishness and her greed as maternal wisdom. It was disgusting, but it was also brilliant in its own insidious way. Margaret was an expert at managing her image, and she was now in full crisis management mode, spinning a web of lies to protect her reputation and validate her decision. She was isolating me, turning me into the villain of my own story. My father, predictably, was her silent partner in this campaign. He sent me a single, feeble text. "Please call your mother. Let's not let this tear the family apart." He wasn't asking her to fix what she had broken. He was asking me to endure the pain quietly. His plea to not tear the family apart was really a plea to not disrupt his peaceful, conflict-averse existence. Armed with my grandmother's video, I felt a strange sense of detachment from their attempts to manipulate me. It was like watching a play where I already knew the secret ending. Their lies had no power because I had the truth, recorded in high definition. Thomas and I sat at our kitchen table and laid out a plan. The first step was to gather more information. I needed to understand the full scope of my mother's deception. Why now? Why Jessica? The answer, I suspected, lay with David and his startup. Aunt Isabel was my first and most important call. Her voice was simmering with a cold rage that matched my own. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she said. "I should have known your mother was capable of this. I warned her." I told her Clara was very clear, but Margaret just waved her hand and said, "Mother was getting sentimental and confused in her old age. I know what she really would have wanted." That lie was the most painful of all, insulting my grandmother's memory by claiming she was senile. "What do you know about David's business, Aunt Izzy?" I asked. Isabel sighed. "Not as much as your mother thinks she does. David is good at pitching an idea, but I've heard whispers. He's been seeking investors, trying to secure a big round of fund. He needs to project an image of success and stability. He needs to look like he comes from old money, from a solid, established family." Suddenly, it all started to click into place. Jessica wasn't just a fiancée, she was a prop. As a brand ambassador for luxury goods, she had connections. Her entire life was curated to project an image of wealth and influence. My mother hadn't given Jessica the ring as a welcome gift. She had given it to her as an asset, a piece of heritage to be leveraged. That stunning sapphire on Jessica's hand wasn't a symbol of love, it was a marketing tool. It was seed capital in the form of a family jewel. My mother was trying to buy David's success with my inheritance. The ring would be a talking point at cocktail parties with potential investors, a silent testament to a lineage and stability that David, with his risky startup, desperately needed to project. Margaret wasn't just supporting her son, she was investing in him, and she had liquidated my emotional inheritance to do it. The next step was to understand the legal standing of the ring. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, suggested I consult a lawyer just to know my options. I found a specialist in estate and property law. I sent her the video and a brief explanation. Her reply was swift and clear. "While a verbal wish captured on video is powerful evidence of intent, heirlooms passed down without being explicitly mentioned in a will can be tricky," she explained over the phone. "Your grandmother gave the ring to your mother. Legally, it became your mother's property to do with as she wished. Our case wouldn't be a slam dunk in court. However, the video is a massive tool for leverage. Publicly, it is devastating to your mother's narrative." The lawyer's advice solidified my strategy. A messy court battle would be expensive and draining and could drag on for years. It would also allow my mother to play the victim, a poor matriarch being dragged through the mud by her ungrateful daughter. I didn't want a legal fight. I wanted justice. I wanted the truth to come out, not in a sterile courtroom, but in the court of our own family. My mother had chosen to humiliate me in a public forum. I decided I would demand the truth in a similar one. For the next week, I ignored every call and text. I let their narrative fester. I let them think they were winning, that my silence was a sign of defeat. My mother even sent a ridiculously expensive bouquet of flowers to my apartment with a card that read, "Let's put this unpleasantness behind us. With love, Mom." It was a dismissal, not an apology. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry I had reacted so poorly. But while they were congratulating themselves on their successful damage control, I was planning. As an architectural drafter, I design structures. I create detailed, precise plans where every line has a purpose. I would approach this the same way. My mother had built a facade of lies. I would design its demolition. My silence had a predictable effect on my mother. After her initial attempts at spinning the narrative failed to get a response from me, her tone shifted from feigned concern to frustration, then to demand. The texts became more pointed. "Carolyn, your refusal to communicate is incredibly childish." And then, "Your father and I are hosting our annual family foundation dinner in 2 weeks. You and Thomas are expected to be there. We will not have this ridiculous drama hanging over the event." The family foundation dinner. It was her crown jewel, the biggest event she organized all year. It was a fundraising gala for a local children's hospital, a cause that was genuinely good, but for my mother, it was also the ultimate stage for her performance as a community pillar and benevolent matriarch. Dozens of family members, wealthy donors, and influential community members would be there. It was the perfect venue. She had just handed me the stage for my final act. "I'll be there," I texted back after a week of complete silence. My reply was simple, devoid of emotion. I knew this would placate her. She would read it as my surrender, my willingness to fall back in line and pretend everything was normal for the sake of her public image. She immediately replied with a saccharine message about how pleased she was that I was choosing to be the bigger person. I felt a grim satisfaction. She had no idea what I was planning. My strategy was simple and had two phases. Phase 1 was to sow seeds of doubt among the key players. Phase 2 was the public reveal. For Phase 1, I started with my father. I sent him the video of my grandmother. I didn't add any commentary, no accusations, no pleas. I just sent the file with the subject line, "Grandma Clara's wish." I knew my father avoided conflict, but I also knew he loved his mother. I was banking on the fact that seeing her, hearing her voice so clearly stating her intentions, would weigh on his conscience. He didn't reply, but I knew he had watched it. My silence in the face of his own would be far more unsettling to him than any angry outburst. Next, I needed to get the video to the two people who were the direct beneficiaries of the theft, David and Jessica. This required a more delicate approach. For Jessica, I did some research. As a brand ambassador, her image was everything. Her online presence was a carefully curated gallery of luxury, elegance, and what she called authentic living. An ugly family scandal involving a stolen heirloom would be a significant crack in that polished veneer. I sent the video to her from an anonymous email address. The subject line was, "The truth about your engagement ring." I wrote a short, simple message. This ring was promised to Carolyn. It was her grandmother's dying wish. The evidence is here. What you do with this information will define your character. I wasn't threatening her, merely presenting her with a moral choice. She could be a knowing accomplice or an unwitting pawn. Given her career, I suspected she would be terrified of being publicly labeled the former. For David, my own brother, my approach was more direct. I sent him the video with a single sentence. "Is this the legacy you want to build?" Of all of them, his betrayal cut the deepest. We hadn't been incredibly close, but he was still my brother. Seeing that smug look on his face at the party confirmed he was a willing participant in my humiliation. Like my mother, he was driven by ambition, but I hoped there was still a shred of decency in him. My video would force him to confront the true foundation of his success. With the seeds planted, Thomas and I began preparing for Phase 2, the foundation dinner. I needed a way to play the video for everyone at the event. Thomas, the ever-practical engineer, figured it out. The gala always featured a slideshow presentation set to music, showcasing the hospital's achievements, with photos of donors and my mother at the center of it all. The presentation ran on a loop on several large screens scattered throughout the ballroom. Thomas learned from a friend who worked in event tech that these presentations were often run from a simple laptop connected to a central projector system. Getting access to that laptop, even for a minute, was the key. We also enlisted the help of Aunt Isabel. She was my ace in the hole. As Margaret's sister, she could move about the event unquestioned. She also knew many of the longtime family friends and donors. Her role was crucial. She would be the one to direct everyone's attention to the screens at the right moment. The day of the gala arrived. I felt a nervous but determined calm. I chose my dress carefully, a simple, elegant dark blue gown. It was understated and professional. I didn't want to look like I was there to cause a scene. I wanted to look like the poised, respectable granddaughter my grandmother had believed me to be. Thomas looked handsome and reassuring in his tuxedo. As we walked into the ballroom, the sight of my mother greeting guests, looking radiant and completely in control, steeled my resolve. She saw us and her face broke into a relieved, patronizing smile. "Carolyn, darling, I'm so glad you came to your senses," she whispered as she air-kissed me. "Let's have a wonderful evening." I just smiled back, a calm, neutral expression. "Of course, Mother," I said. My compliance was making her comfortable, and that was exactly what I wanted. I saw David and Jessica across the room. Jessica was flashing the sapphire ring to a group of admirers, but I noticed she couldn't quite meet my eyes. David looked tense, his jaw tight. The seeds were sprouting. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to pull back the curtain. The gala was in full swing. Hundreds of people mingled in the opulent hotel ballroom, the air buzzing with conversation and the clinking of glasses. My mother was at the podium, delivering a heartfelt speech about the importance of charity and family. She even had the audacity to mention her own mother, Clara, painting her as a woman whose spirit of giving was the inspiration for the foundation. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. She was using my grandmother's memory to bolster the very image she had desecrated. Thomas gave my hand a reassuring squeeze under the table. Aunt Isabel, seated at a nearby table with some old family friends, gave me a subtle nod. It was almost time. David and Jessica were seated at the head table with my parents. I watched Jessica fidget with her napkin, her eyes constantly darting towards the large screens where the photo slideshow was playing on a loop. She looked deeply uncomfortable. David was drinking his wine a little too quickly, his face flushed. As my mother's speech wound down to a close, she raised her glass. And finally, I want to thank my own wonderful family, my supportive husband, my brilliant son David and his lovely fiancée Jessica, and my daughter Carolyn for always standing beside me. It was the final, perfect lie. The applause started, and that was our cue. Thomas excused himself from the table, casually making his way towards the back of the ballroom where the tech station was located. The event technician, a young man who had been hired for the night, was distracted by a waiter offering him a plate of appetizers. It was the window Thomas needed. He walked behind the station, and with a swift, practiced movement, he swapped the USB drive in the laptop for the one we had prepared. It took less than 10 seconds. He then walked away, melting back into the crowd. Back at the podium, my mother was basking in the applause. "Please," she said, gesturing to the screens, "enjoy this presentation of the wonderful work our foundation has done this past year." The lights dimmed slightly. The slideshow on the screens flickered and then restarted. But instead of photos of smiling children and donors, my grandmother's face filled the screens. She was sitting in her sun-drenched living room, looking directly into the camera. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The murmuring started almost immediately. My mother, who had her back to the screens, looked confused by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. She turned around, and her face went white as a sheet. Grandma Clara's voice, clear and unwavering, filled the silent ballroom, amplified by the event's professional sound system. "This ring," she said, holding up her hand, the sapphire sparkling even on the video, "is my mother's and her mother's before her. It is to go to her firstborn daughter, my firstborn granddaughter, Carolyn. It is for her, only for her." Every eye in the room was glued to the screens. They heard her wish, her love, her strength. And then they heard the most damning part. "I'm putting this on record, Isabel, because I worry. Margaret has ambitions. She sometimes sees people as tools to get what she wants, even her own children. I want to make sure Carolyn is protected. This ring is her legacy, not a bargaining chip." The video ended, and the screen went black. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. Then, Aunt Isabel stood up. "My sister, Margaret," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "knew about this video. She knew her mother's wish, and she chose to ignore it." All hell broke loose. The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers, shocked exclamations, and accusing glances. Everyone turned to look at my mother, who stood frozen on the stage, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. Her perfect evening, her perfect image, had been utterly demolished. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then, another drama unfolded at the head table. Jessica, her face pale and streaked with tears, stood up abruptly. She wrenched the sapphire ring off her finger and slammed it down on the table in front of a stunned David. "I will not be a part of this," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I was told this was a gift. I will not wear stolen property." With that, she turned and fled the ballroom. David, his face burning with humiliation, stared down at the ring, then looked at his mother with an expression of pure fury before storming out after Jessica. I finally looked at my mother. She was no longer the powerful matriarch on the stage. She was just a woman, exposed and alone, her web of lies in tatters around her. Her eyes found mine across the room, and for the first time I didn't see anger or manipulation. I saw defeat. Complete and utter defeat. I stood up, Thomas by my side, and we walked towards the exit. We didn't run. We walked with our heads held high. As we passed my father, he finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a miserable mix of shame and regret. He had chosen his side, and he had chosen wrongly. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind. I didn't feel a surge of triumphant joy. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. My grandmother's voice had finally been heard, and the truth had finally been set free. The aftermath of the gala was swift and brutal for my mother. Her social standing, which she had spent a lifetime meticulously constructing, crumbled overnight. The story of her deception, confirmed by her own mother's words and her sister's testimony, spread like wildfire through her social circles and the donor community. The foundation, her pride and joy, was irrevocably tainted. Several major donors publicly withdrew their support, citing a crisis of confidence in the board's leadership. Within a month, my mother was forced to step down from the charity board in disgrace. Her name, once a symbol of philanthropic grace, was now synonymous with scandal. My father called me once, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He told me my mother had barely left her room for weeks. He didn't apologize on her behalf, I knew he wouldn't, but he did say, "I watched the you sent me, over and over. My mother, she was a good woman, I should have listened to her." It was the closest to an admission of fault I would ever get from him, and I accepted it for what it was, a quiet surrender. Our relationship would never be the same, but perhaps, in time, a different, more honest one could be built. I wasn't holding my breath. My brother David's life also took a dramatic turn. His engagement to Jessica was officially over. Her public rejection of the stolen ring had made their union untenable, especially as David's startup was still desperately seeking investors. The scandal had attached a stink of dishonesty and instability to him, the very things he and my mother had tried to use the ring to ward off. The irony was bitter. In her attempt to secure his legacy, my mother had sabotaged it. I heard through the grapevine that he was struggling to find funding and had to downsize his company. He never contacted me. A week after the gala, a small package arrived at my apartment by courier. Inside was the navy blue velvet box. I opened it, and there was my grandmother's ring, the sapphire glowing as beautifully as ever. There was no note. I later found out from Aunt Isabel that Jessica had given the ring to her before leaving, wanting nothing more to do with my family. Isabel had, in turn, given it to my father and told him to do the right thing for once in his life. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. It felt like it had finally come home, but wearing it felt different now. It was no longer just a symbol of my heritage, it was a symbol of my own strength, a reminder that I had a voice and that I had used it to fight for the truth. It was a testament to the fact that I had refused to be a tool in someone else's ambition. Thomas and I decided to elope. The idea of a big wedding, of navigating the minefield of family politics, felt exhausting and unnecessary. We wanted our marriage to be about us, not about appeasing anyone else. We flew to the coast and exchanged our vows on a cliff overlooking the ocean at sunset, with only the officiant and a photographer as witnesses. It was simple, intimate, and perfect. I wore my grandmother's ring, its sapphire the same deep blue as the sea below. It felt right. Aunt Isabel was the only family member we told beforehand. She was thrilled for us. Our bond had deepened through this ordeal, and she had become more of a mother to me than Margaret had ever been. She was my true inheritance, a family member who offered unconditional love, support, and a fierce sense of justice. She taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about who stands by you when the foundations are shaken. Today, my life is peaceful. I still work as an architectural drafter, but I've started taking on my own small design projects, building a future on my own terms. Thomas and I are saving up to buy a small house, a place with a solid foundation that we can build on together. I don't speak to my mother, father, or brother. The silence is not born of anger anymore, but of acceptance. I have accepted that they are who they are, and I cannot change them. What I can do is choose not to let their toxicity define my life. The ring on my finger is a constant reminder. It connects me to the legacy of strong women I come from, but it also marks the beginning of a new legacy, my own. It's a legacy of truth, resilience, and the quiet courage it takes to demolish a house of lies and build a home filled with honesty and love in its place.